to when it almost seems like I'm talking to a screen. So, but nonetheless, I'm really excited to have this opportunity to speak to you. So thanks, Karen. So firstly, what I'd like to do is acknowledge where I am. So I'm on in Blackwood in South Australia, and I'm on Kaurna country. And it's a really important thing for me to acknowledge where I am and what country I'm on, especially here. And the Kaurna people are a very special group, very special cultural group. And I want to share you a story because too often I find that, you know, for me, it's not enough to read an acknowledgement and leave it at that. For me, it's really important to feel the energy of a place, to feel that connection of a place. And I want to share a story with you where we had an event quite a few years ago where we had a Kaurna elder come along. The Kaurna elder came along to enrich the experience and to teach the people at the event, the family at the event, all about culture. And he started off, and it was the first time I met him, and I instantly felt connected. But the first time at this event, he pointed at me and he said, "Can you come up here?" So I came up next to him, and there was probably about 100 people in front of him. And he was saying to everyone, "Look, I want to talk to you about what reconciliation." What he did is he said, "Jace, can you stand right next to me?" So I stood next to him, and he was talking to the crowd, and he took two steps back behind me, and he said, "Aboriginal people don't want to stand here. You don't want to stand behind you." And then he took a few steps forward when he was standing in front of me, and he said, "Aboriginal don't want to stand here." And then he took two steps back, shoulder to shoulder, right, and he said, "Here, side by side." And that resonated with me, and that meant a lot to me. And it meant so much to me that I wrote a poem. And I want to share that poem with you. And the poem is called Side by Side. We can never feel what they felt. We can never see what they saw. We can never lose what they lost. But we can listen, and we can learn, and we can try. We can walk side by side as we journey together into a better world, a more united world. We shall never forget the wrongs of the past, nor sit in their shadows. Together we will find a new light. And with that, I want to acknowledge that I am on Kaurna country. I want to acknowledge the cultural connection, spiritual beliefs, the dreaming, elders past, present and emerging, and also encourage you to think about more about your country, about the country that you're on, and learn about the Aboriginal people and pass that on to those in your care or the children and the young minds that you're educating. So firstly, on your screen, this is me, the guy with the hat, and this is me doing what I love best. And what I love best is nature and children. When we have nature and children together, it's something that I thrive on. And in 2014, two of the most special things happened in my life. The first one was that my first daughter was born. And the second one was I started work at Nature Play. Now, Nature Play was established in 2014 as a not-for-profit, and the government provided us some funding and said, in 4 years' time, we'd like you to be a fully fledged not-for-profit. That was 2014, and now we are a fully fledged not-for-profit. But to give you some idea about where we started with not quite 2 staff, but we started 2014 and we held our first event in the Botanic Gardens in Adelaide. And at that event, what we got was 100 people that came along, and we thought this is going to be a movement. 100 people with our first event. This is really exciting. So fast forward to 2018. And we decided to hold an event in a place called Kaipo Forest. And we started to just get into the event area. And our biggest event was 300 people, and Kaipo Forest is about 30 k's south of Adelaide. And it was an autumn day in the school holidays, and we thought maybe we'll get 600-700 people that will come out into a forest, bring their families, and engage in some unstructured play and some other experiences in the forest. So with that, on the day, we didn't get the projected 600 or 700, we got 8,000. 8,000 people showed up to this forest. In fact, there was a 10-kilometre line and the police were called because of the traffic congestion and they wanted to know what was going on. And on that day, we learnt two really important things. The first thing was that we need to get better at our events, of course, because, well, that was unseen. But secondly, and most importantly, was the appetite of the South Australian community. They told us that we need this for our children. And that was a turning point. Obviously our events now, I think our events, we run awards for our events and they're always fully prescribed and we love what we do. We do events, we go into schools. I do what I'm doing here in this photo, which is educating people in national parks. But when we talk about nature, in nature play, not the wild as such. So some people think, well, nature's a bit separate, nature's in the wild, it's a conservation park, it's a national park. We'll take our children there occasionally. But for us, that's not what nature is. So nature is not a sometimes thing for children, it's an everyday thing for children. And it's an everyday thing because it's in the treasures they find. It's the language they use to describe those treasures. It's their curiosity in looking for them. It's the narrative they create. And it's in the discoveries they make. And in those discoveries, it's the connections they have, whether it be to birds, whether it be to reptiles, but those discoveries lead to that desire to want to learn more. The creatures they encounter can be slaters. We have lots of slaters. This is my daughter here in her hand. Lots of slaters in our backyard. And it's a beautiful thing to watch a child connect, to watch mindfully a slater walk across their hand. And not to mention the sensory component of that. So nature is also the soil. Soil in our hands, it's under our fingernails. It's the smell of it. If I said to you, think about what the soil smells like after rain. And you could probably almost smell that. The mud between their fingers, the squelchy mud, the gritty mud, all of this stuff constitutes nature. And it's the things.
So I just let you know, the presentation actually just currently isn't showing. If you could share your screen.
Oh. Okay. Can you, let's try a look here. Can you, sorry about that. Look, so the presentation is not, we were talking about these issues just before everyone came on board.
We were, and you know, we didn't want to be disappointed.
I wasn't a role, just but now it doesn't working. I don't know if anyone heard me.
Oh, well, at the moment we can see you, but the presentation actually isn't rolling at the minute.
Gotcha.
He's sharing the screen.
And the presentation is just stunning, and we really want you to see the pictures. So it'll be worth the wait, everyone. There it is.
Can you see that now?
It's coming up now. Perfect.
Can you see that now, Karen? You've muted yourself, I believe. But you can see it. Excellent.
We can.
Okay, so this is the glorious picture that started my presentation. And I'll flick through some photos. So when I was talking to the man on the screen with the hat, it was this guy, which was me. And then I went to talking through what nature is, what it constitutes. So I talked about the treasures, we talked about the discoveries, creatures, soil in the hands and under the fingernails, the mud between their fingers and whether it's sculptural or gritty. This is where I was at, the things they create. So for me, nature, like I said, is beyond conservation parks. It's in our own backyards, it's in our own services, it's in our areas. And this here, what you're looking at is my daughter's gruffalo stew. And she used to make this gruffalo stew all the time, and she used to leave it outside of the back door for the gruffalo. So in her mind, she had this beautiful narrative that the gruffalo would visit our back garden and would eat some of her stew. And at night time, I would go out there and take a little bit so it looked like it had been eaten, of course. It's also about the food they grow. It's how it tastes. It's that feeling of growing something in the soil. And it's the places they go. And all of these elements constitute nature and play. And it's really important to recognise that, because some people see this idea of nature as a foreign concept. But when we talk about children and nature play, it's beyond that. It's about the worlds they live in and what we can control, whether it's a big area, whether it's a small area. In looking at all of these elements that I just touched on, they're all applicable to large spaces, small spaces, backyard spaces, even balcony spaces. Now, one of the interesting things that that's come out is a fellow by the name of Richard Louv. And a lot of you would have heard about Richard Louv. He wrote a book called The Last Child in the Woods, and he talked about nature deficit disorder. But there was something he talked about that really got me thinking, and that was this: the child in nature is an endangered species. And I thought, that's an interesting thing. That's a really interesting thing to say, Richard, about child being in nature an endangered species. And then we think about it, and it starts to make sense, which is where this dialogue around the habitat of childhood comes from. So I've looked in lots of different research papers, and I've looked at lots of comparisons. Because of my background in ecology, I've looked at lots of comparisons around species. And when you look at those comparisons, if you take a species out of its natural habitat and you put it into one that is not its natural habitat, but it has various limitations, then we start to see a significant difference in the development of that species. So we see a big difference if they're in their natural habitat compared to an enclosure that does have elements of their habitat. Now, I'm not saying our children live in enclosures, of course, but what I am saying is that there are limitations put on children today. Limitations in where they play and what they do. And those limitations are what I want to start to unpack. I want to start to unpack, what does a child in nature mean? What are some of those developmental benefits, and how are they applicable to wherever you are, whatever your site is, whatever your backyard is, whatever your pedagogy is? How can that be applied? So firstly, I want to start with asking you a question, and I want you to think about where you played as kids. So where you played, would be an outdoor environment, who you played with there. What were some of your favourite memories? You know, did you do anything risky? Did you do anything strange that you think maybe today kids wouldn't be allowed to do? Think about that for a few moments. I want to take you to this map. And so hang on to that thought of where you were. I want to take you to this map. And whether or not you can see this map, it doesn't really matter if you're looking at your phone, but I can explain it to you. And this is when I first got what the issue was. Because when Nature Play started, the statistics were telling us and the research were telling us that things like anxiety, obesity, sedentary behaviour, a whole range of elements in childhood had increased. And it was quite a grim picture. So when I saw this map, and this map was by Tyndall, he's in the UK, it started to make sense. So what we have is we have 4 generations in a family. And the reference point is that each generation, the child is 8 years old. So we're going to start with Ed today. So Ed is 8 years old. Now his great-grandfather, so this large area that you see, this large area, his great-grandfather, that was his play range. That was where he roamed. That was where he played. And that was in 1919. So aged 8, he was allowed to walk 6 miles to go fishing. So that's probably about 12 k's or so. That was his range that he played in. So then we fast forward to 1950. And Ed's grandfather, Jack, also aged 8, was able to walk about a mile. So you see that the range is starting to shrink. And then we look at his mother, Vicky, in 1979, up here. And it's about half a mile. Then we look at Ed today, aged 8. But he can walk to the end of his street. Now, for some of us, it's perhaps to the letterbox and back. Because this notion of children roaming the streets as far as his great-grandfather did, that's no longer something that children do. So that play has changed. Now, to put that into context as to why this really made me understand the extent of it, is I'm going to make some assumptions about where you played as kids. Based on how many people I've asked before, generally, the assumptions I will make is that at some point in your childhood, you climbed a tree. And at some point in your childhood, you built something. Could have been a fort, a cubby, could have been anything. You built something from natural stuff. So let's say those 2 things that you did in your childhood. The first one, the tree climbing, is if I think about the benefits of tree climbing for a child. So we're looking at gross motor, looking at coordination, we're looking at that sense of pride, we're looking at risk management, risk assessment, looking at a whole range of benefits, probably 20 or 30 benefits. And then we jump over to building something with your friends. So let's say it is a fort, and you're building this fort out of sticks and rope and hessian and all sorts of things. You're building it. Then I asked about the benefits of that. So the benefits of that, we look at teamwork, critical thinking, resourcefulness, a sense of place, sense of mastery. All of these elements are benefits. So then if we were to make a list of all the things that we did as kids, and we made benefits, a list of benefits under all of those benefits belonged in your play range. In the area that you played is where those benefits were received. If that play range shrinks, so we look at Ed now, if that play range shrinks, the question is, where do children get those benefits? Where do they get the gross motor skills, the coordination? Where do they get the teamwork, the critical think? Where do they get those? And the answer to that, and I've thought about it a lot, is there's essentially three main areas where children get that opportunity to play, like we did as kids. And there's often a saying that, we went and we played until the streetlights came on. Or children will put their school bag down and go outside for hours on end. Now that sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. So when we look at where do children play today, the first place is our backyards. So backyards, when I was a kid, our backyard was pretty big. In fact, your backyard may have been pretty big too. But today backyards have changed. Today backyards have shrunk. And generally, backyards are not made for play. They're made for entertaining and for adults. So then we can say, well, a lot of those benefits in our play range aren't necessarily, children aren't getting those in those backyards. Secondly, second place is open space. So our council reserves, which are traditionally characterised by lots of grass, a playground in the middle, and trees around the outside that are trimmed in a way that children can't really climb them. So, and that's quite generic. There are some really great play spaces out there, but we're just using that as a point of reference. So in that space, children can climb, they can jump, but again, they're not necessarily getting all those benefits that we would have got in our play range. And thirdly, and most importantly, where children get benefits today are places of care and education, childcare, early years, primary school. Those places are such important windows for childhood. And we have seen a change. We've seen a change in curriculum, we've seen a change in the national quality standards, we've seen a change across the board, even in the way that spaces are built and designed. There's been such a shift because that shift represents the need, the developmental need that children must have in order to become the best version of themselves. And in order to become the best version of themselves, we need to make sure we provide them the right environment for play. Now, when I talk about play to educators, to parents, even to children, I talk about play in 4 different ways. So I say, let's say we have a checklist. And this is my checklist. Now, a checklist of play, I could give you a checklist of probably about 40 different types of play, from social play, dramatic play, etc. But we're going to stick with 4 types. And I want you to think about how this may apply to your centre, to your service, to your backyard, wherever it is that you're thinking that you have an influence in a child's life and the way they play. So the second thing is I'm going to use a playground as a point of reference. I'm going to use a playground, the ones with the steps, the swing and the slide. Now, I'm certainly not saying that playgrounds are a bad thing. What I'm saying is that everyone knows what a playground looks like, and it's all about balance. And I always talk about balance because my 3-year-old loves the playground, but equally so, we balance that with other types of play. So firstly, we're going to talk about physical play. So physical play is running, jumping, climbing, pushing, pulling, all of those sorts of elements. Now, if I ask you on your checklist, do you think that a child on a playground sufficiently meets their physical play requirements? So some people would be, you know what, I think it does, I might tick that. Some people would be, no, it doesn't, and others would probably be thinking it's just a trick question because it is an important question, and I want to demonstrate my view of what physical play is through telling you a story. So the story I want to share with you is a couple of years ago, my wife, my daughter and our friends, we went on a camping trip, and on the way home we decided to stop into a winery in Clare, which is a beautiful region, by the way. So we stopped by a winery and we got there, and my wife's friends, they had a 5-year-old Luke, and they had his sister as always 18 months. So we got there, they all, as you do when you get to winery, they ordered their wine and their cheese and stuff. And my wife looked at me and she said, Jace, have you got the kids? Can you go play with the kids? You're the nature play guy. So I thought, yep, no worries. I will go off with the kids, which is okay by me because one of the things I love doing is playing with children, and not so much. I see my role, and I'll touch on this later. I have varying roles when it comes to how I engage with children in terms of how they play. So we walked around the winery, and what you're seeing here, I want you to pretend you can't see that person. That's me. I want you to pretend you can't see that person there. So we get to this tree, and Luke, who was just over 5, he said, "Jace, can I climb this tree?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, no worries." So he started to climb, and he got to, if you can't see my cursor here, he got to here, which is where that hollow bit is at the bottom of the tree. He got to there, and he froze, and he said, I can't do this. I need to get down. So he kind of slid to the side and got down. And he was like, whoa, okay, I'm not doing that. And then my daughter was like, okay, cool. And that's her in the tree. And then she started to climb up the tree, took her shoes off, and up she went. And Luke did something really important. He watched. He watched another child do something that he didn't believe that he could do. And then he looked at me and he said, can I try again? I said, yep, for sure. So he watched my daughter and then he thought, okay, well, I'm going to take my shoes off. I'll take my shoes off and I'll give this another go. So here he is, he got up to this point. So you can see he's way past where he got to first. So he gets to this point and I can see he's quite determined. And then he kind of freezes a bit. And he looks around and he realizes just where he is. And he is petrified. Absolutely petrified because he's never been that high before. So he said, Jace, can you help me? Can you help me? I need to get down. And I could have done 2 things. The first thing I could have done is I'd say, yep, I'll get you straight down. I agree with you. This is a scary tree and I don't think you can do it. But the second option that I went for is I said, look, I can help you. I can help you down here. I promise I've got you and you won't fall. I can help you. Are you okay if I help you? And he said, yes. So then I was able to put my hand under his tummy and I put my other hands behind his feet and I tapped 1 foot at a time. I said, this one, and he would put it down and then down and then down. So we kept going down. And I could hear that he was breathing quite heavy because there's this fear that sort of takes over when you're in that space. In fact, I love this type of fear because my daughter calls it the good scared. She'll often come home and she says, Dad, I was a good scared today. I'm like, tell me about it. I don't want to see it because I know you must have been super high. But she says, I was the good scared. So he was up there and it took us 6 or 7 minutes for him to get down, for me to help him down. And then we got to the bottom of the tree, got down, and he looked at me and he said, I did it. I did it. And the look in his face was something that was one of the most beautiful moments I've had. And then up and down he went. No longer was he fearful. No longer was he scared. He went right up into the canopy. And so he raced over to Mum and Dad and he called Mum and Dad over and he said, I want to show you something. I want to show something. So off we went and they came over with their wine and cheese and everything. And I was standing next to me and they kind of looked at me like, oh, have you got him here? Because off he went up the tree. So I did take a few steps closer to the tree just in case I needed to catch him. But he did extremely well. And he went up and down the tree. And they said to me, they said, thanks, thanks so much for letting him climb the tree. It was a really positive experience for him. And I was reflecting on it. And it wasn't the fact that I allowed him to climb the tree. It's the fact that I gave him permission to believe. I gave him the space to believe that he could do it. Now, too often we get in these situations, and I was guilty of it when I was an early parent, and inadvertently we make decisions for a child. We say, that's too dangerous. We do not think that's a good idea. And often we say that, and we're sending a message to our children without even knowing it. And like I said, I did it many times when I was coming up with my first daughter. And we say, no, we don't think you can do it. So I think, okay, well, maybe I can't do it. But we're saying that because we see a physical risk, and we say a physical risk, and we want to make sure that our children are not exposed to physical risks, because that's a really important thing. But what we don't see is the risk of not doing it. So if I had said to Luke, no, I don't think it's a good idea for you to climb this particular tree, what has he missed out on? He's missed out on that feeling to go, I did that. Now, in an era where we are finding that children are having to work harder for resilience. We are finding that children are becoming more anxious and more fearful than any other generation. Those moments matter. They count. And those moments are there when children have risk, when they can get that good scared. Now, if this tree had nails hanging out of it, I'd deem it as a very hazardous tree. It would be a hazard, and I would say that's not worth the risk. It's not worth the benefits that you're going to get from a nail-ridden tree. But it wasn't. And I made the assessment that those benefits are worth the risk. And when I reflect on it, when we talk about physical play and we compare this to a playground, there's not that good scared. There's not that whole body experience of climbing something. So when I go back to that checklist and I say, okay, would we now tick physical play to be adequate enough in a playground? And I would say, actually, we wouldn't. We'd put lots of other little headings below that to ensure that our children are not only getting gross motor, but they're getting all those other additional benefits of physical play. So physical play, the next one is construction play. It's making stuff from stuff. Now, when I talk about construction play, I think about sticks. And sticks is something that I've seen lots of controversy about in different schools. Some sites really use a lot of sticks, they embrace sticks, and some sites say, nope, we don't pick up sticks, we don't touch sticks. And you know, that old saying is, don't pick up sticks or don't touch that stick. That's probably something that someone has heard somewhere along the way in their lives, or you maybe have even said that a few times. And it was quite a difficult thing to articulate. Why do we want to let kids play with sticks? And then I had a friend of mine who said to me, Jace, you know, on this whole stick debate, what would you rather me hit you with? A cricket bat or a stick? And I said, I don't really want you to hit me with either, but if I had the choice, probably a stick, actually. And he said, okay, well, if a child hits another child with a cricket bat in a school setting, do they ban the cricket bats? I said, well, no, they don't. They determine a way to mutually have a discussion with the children. They talk about the behaviour. They talk about ways to not engage in the behaviour of hitting other kids with sticks. So they respectfully talk through the behaviour around the stick. Sorry, around the cricket bat. So talk about the cricket bat, and cricket goes on in the school. So cricket goes on, and one of the reasons for that is we can see the great benefit that sport brings. We can see the great benefit of cricket. It's teamwork, it's achievement, it's all these things. And then we go to a stick. So we go to a stick, and if a child, I've seen this before, a child's been hit with a stick in a school setting, they say, right, we need to ban these things. They're dangerous. But again, it's the behaviour. Talking about the behaviour and viewing a stick not as a foreign object, but as a key tool to the way a child plays, just the way that we view a cricket bat. So for us as children, we played with sticks all the time. We knew what to do with them. And there has been a gap for some children between playing with sticks and not playing with sticks. And that gap is really important for us to acknowledge that, you know what, sometimes children may not understand how to safely use a stick, but I guarantee you, if you sat down with children and you said, right, we're going to talk about sticks. We're going to ask, first question we want to ask you is, what don't we do with sticks? Children are very competent. They will tell you what not to do with sticks, what they shouldn't do. And then we can ask them, what do we do with sticks? Again, they're capable and competent, and they will tell you what they think is okay to do with sticks. And that becomes an agreement and a mutual way forward to do that. And it's very respectful, but also those benefits of building something together is such an important thing to consider when we're looking at construction play. And construction play, another term that people use is loose parts. So loose parts is quite a common thing that is talked about. We've got junk loose parts with our, pipes and crates and all that sort of stuff. And then we also have our natural loose parts. So I want to share another story with you, because I love to tell lots of stories, is that quite a few years ago, I was at a site, and this site actually was mentored by Nikki Buchan. A lot of people would know Nikki. And this site was embarking on a process to do a bush school a couple of days a week. And so they had to do lots of preparing around their pedagogy, around their approach. And Nikki had a couple of rules. So this was the first day. We got out there. She said, right, guys, we talked about this, but just to reiterate the rules, this is for the educators. The rules are to put your hand behind your back and not to say anything to any children, not to intervene in any play or anything like that. The only way we would need to intervene if there was potential for a catastrophic injury. So that was the rules. So if you think about it, put the hand behind your back and zip it, basically. That was what they needed to do. And I was there on this day. So we were there, and the kids went out. Lots of provocations everywhere, lots of loose parts and bits and pieces. Some children gravitated to the trees and they picked up stuff straight away. Some of them didn't. Some of these children were walking around for a good 30, 40 minutes. Now for educators, there's a desire to go, hang on, we need to guide this child into doing something. We need to say, okay, well, why don't you try this? Why don't we lead you in this direction or this direction? But they had a very strict set of rules that was set. So after about 45, 50 minutes, all the children were engaged. There was a sigh of relief. And there was a particular group of children who took very long time. And I believe that walking around was not them being bored. That walking around was us giving them childhood time, giving them the space to think, giving them a window to just breathe, reflect, and think. So when we say there's no such thing as boredom, there's actually more depth to that. There's more context to that. So we walked around, and then these children, obviously we were itching to ask these children what they were making, but we couldn't. Because often if we interrupt children when they're playing, we interrupt a really important dialogue. And that dialogue is full of speech, it's full of language, it's full of creativity. So we didn't ask them what they were doing. And afterwards we found out. So what we have here, and kids had different names for it, but it was a kingdom. And in the kingdom, I'm going to talk you through the structure of it. So all of this was just random loose parts, provocations set out. So what we have is these children identified that there were gum nuts, and these gum nuts were people. So in the middle there, you can see the dark coloured gum nuts. They were the deceased in this kingdom. And then we go down here to where we have this row of lighter coloured gum nuts. They were the people in the hospital. And then over to the left, you may or may not be able to see it, but they found these green buds, these vibrant green coloured buds. They were the living people in this kingdom. Now this kingdom was quite sophisticated, and it had an orphanage, it had a library, it had a playground, it had a whole range of different things. Now arguably this could have been derived from a video game, this could have been derived from anywhere, but these children spent hours creating this. And a few days later, one of the teachers called me and they said, Jace, do you know those kids who took so long to do something and eventually they created that beautiful kingdom? She said, usually they would struggle to write half a page. She said they're up to 6 pages and they haven't stopped. And what do you think they were writing about? They were writing about the kingdom. They were writing about the story that they created just from these natural loose parts. And for me, that is a very strong link to children having incentive to learn. Because children enjoy an experience, it provides them incentive. And when we look at this example, it has fed directly into their literacy. So we talked about physical play, we talked about construction play. Next is imaginative play. Now we look at a playground, and obviously when we go back to loose parts, I made the decision for you and I crossed the box that said construction play in a playground, because clearly there's no opportunity for construction play in a playground. So then we look at imaginative play, and this one's an interesting one, because if I said to you, would you tick the box? And you'd be like, well, actually, children use their imagination in playgrounds. They invent games, they do all sorts of things. And yes, absolutely they do. And it's such an important thing to recognise, is that a child's imagination is so fertile and it can grow into beautiful things. But I use the analogy of an artist, and I say that, look, if you're an artist and I was to give you one colour and a piece of paper, and I was to put you in a room that had mostly white walls, had a white table, and I said to you, can you please create your best work? With your artistic ability, create your best work. You would create something, no doubt you'd create something. But then if I said, look, scenario 2 for you is I'm going to give you all the colours you want, I'm going to give you all the mediums that you want, and I'm going to put you in a room that overlooks the ocean. And then, would you be in a better environment? Mentally and physically, would you be into a better environment to create your best piece of work? And I would say, yes, actually you would be. And whilst an artist still created something wonderful in that white room with that one colour, they really thrived. They pushed the limits of their potential when we gave them the right things to paint and create with. A space for a child is very similar. They will use their imagination wherever they are, but that imagination will thrive if we create the right conditions for it. So next to that playground, if we had a winding path, boulders and arches and nooks and crannies and loose parts and seed pods, would that be more conducive for a child to thrive when we talk about imaginative play? And I'll say absolutely it would be. So when I compare a playground to a natural play space, it's an extension of what a playground offers, because playground, it does offer imaginative play and physical play, but it doesn't offer the environment that children need to truly thrive. So another story I want to share with you is, this is my 3-year-old daughter, and we often go to a forest. There's a local forest and we go to this forest. And often as adults, we get caught up to go, we know exactly where we want to go. We want to go to that lookout. So we're going to walk to that lookout together. And that's our mission, from point A to point B. And when I go to forests with my daughter, often within an hour, we would have travelled 40 metres. And that's quite a slow walk, to be honest, especially for me. I'm just sort of walking, and I've got 2 roles that I play. I'm an observer, or I'm a play partner, which is where I'm invited into the play and I can play and join in the narrative. Or the observer is me putting my hands behind my back and not saying hurry up, or not saying do this or do that, just letting childhood happen. So we're walking along, and I've got my hands behind my back, just looking around at the trees, which is what I usually do, or taking photos. And she says, Dad, come and see. And I said, what is it? She said, Stickman. I found Stickman. And if those of you who've read Stickman, that actually looks like Stickman. So then we started to talk. I was like, okay, what do we need to do? We need to take Stickman to his faraway tree. And we started this narrative, and we used different language, and then we went on an adventure together. We were play partners. Eventually we found the tree, the right tree, which took a very long time. And then we returned back, because a very important part of children feeling comfortable in nature is that we return back to the same places. And this is when we're talking about excursions and those sorts of things, or in our own family lives where we go. So we went back again, and then she said the same thing. Dad. I said, what is it? And she said, I found Stickman's family. And this, you can see just in the blurry background there, the ground was full of these sticks covered in lichen. It had recently rained, and lichen is that soft, orangey, spongy stuff. And she started to pick them all up. So I picked them all up, and oh, this one's soft. This one's got a long leg. This one doesn't have a head. Started to describe these sticks as if they were part of Stickman's family. And of course, what we did from there, after we had a discussion and I asked some open-ended questions, is that we went and we put these with Stickman under the faraway tree. So when we're talking about a space and its potential for children to utilise their imagination, this was in a forest along a path. Now this could be anywhere. It's that children have the mindset that I'm here. This is my space. I can become a master of this space. I'm not setting the agenda for play. I'm just letting it happen. And from an imaginative perspective, when we look at a playground, it's very challenging to see where children can get sensory input. And what the research tells us, this was a paper, is that preschool children use richer language in a natural environment compared to an indoor classroom. And based on that example that I just walked you through there, you can see why. Because it's quite spontaneous, because there's opportunities to go beyond what we may have prescribed. So I've talked about the 3 types of play. I've talked about physical play, I've talked about constructed play, I've talked about imaginative play. And the 4th one, and the most important one, is sensory play. And I say it's the most important one because we are sensory beings. From the moment that we are in our mother's womb, our senses are starting to operate. In fact, where you are sitting right now, your senses are working. You're receiving lots of stimuli. So all of that sensory information comes into your brain. So you may be watching me or hearing me, or you may smell something that's cooking. All that sensory information comes into your brain. Your brain organises it, processes it, and then it gives you an assumption or a prediction about your environment. So you may smell something, oh, someone's cooking something. For children, the need, and that process I just explained to you then is called sensory integration, where our senses are responding to different stimuli. For our children, the need for their sensory integration is paramount, it's amplified. So it's amplified to the point where it becomes so fundamental that children have sensory experiences that it can have impacts on their levels of concentration. They can have impacts on their emotional regulation. There's lots of research out there to say that sensory play is like an umbrella across all the other types of play, whether that's tree climbing, whether that's any physical gross motor activity. Sensory underpins it all. And one of the important elements from a sensory perspective is that it's not just feeling something or touching something. So I'll give you an example of a playground. So in a playground setting, children can climb up a set of stairs, and they can go across the bridge, and they can go down the slippery dip, and they can do it again, and they can do it again. The sensory input they've got there, obviously they've got the sight and they've got the hearing and a little bit of touch. If we compare that to on a rainy day, a child is barefoot and they're climbing a tree. They're using their feet, their hands. Each one is different. Each texture is different. They're using their sense of smell because of the rain. They're using their brain, using their mind. This doesn't only become a whole of body sensory experience, it becomes a whole of brain experience. And that's where all the neurons start firing. And that's why when we talk about sensory play, it's making sure that sensory play is part of a child's everyday environment. And I often refer to this thing called the sensory curriculum, which is totally made up, so don't look it up. You may find something, but I totally made this up. So the sensory curriculum of childhood, and this, for me, so when I picked my daughter up from kindy, my first daughter, when I picked her up from kindy, and she came to me, she'd often be the filthiest kid, covered in who knows what, I have no idea. And often to us, as adults, we think, oh, here we go, washing. If I say to you, mud, you're like, oh, in fact, if you're wearing something white and I say to you mud as an adult, you'd be, yeah, I don't know about that, Jace. And if I say, okay, for a second, let's pretend you're a child and I say the word mud. And all of a sudden you're like, ooh, that sounds nice, that sounds exciting, that sounds fun. The perspective has changed. So from our perspective, we see, oh, it's quite dirty and filthy. But for children, it's the most exciting, and it gives them so much incentive and joy for play. So when I see my daughter and she's covered head to toe, I have a good feeling about that. I'm like, she had a good sensory day. And for me, because play is not what it used to be, a good sensory day, the rest takes care of itself. So she's had tactile experiences, she's had experiences that will begin to shape her perception of the world, her emotional regulation, her fine motor skills, all of these things. And that's what I term this idea of sensory curriculum, is to make sure that children are, and it's definitely not saying that children need to be filthy every single day, of course not. But what it's saying is we need to recognise the importance of that. Because if a barrier for us is mess, then I think there are many, many creative ways to get around that. One of those that I do lots of my daughters is I use flowers in ice. So I get mint, I get lavender, rosemary, and I freeze it in ice, and I put it into the freezer, and we have ice flowers, and we crush them, and we can introduce sand and different flowers, and it still creates a really, really sensory environment without having the mess of mud. Because for some people, mud is a challenging thing. And when we look at the benefits of mud, and you can research it and look it up, is there are so many health benefits of children being exposed to what's in dirt. So this is what I find is really interesting. I've seen this a lot. It says that we have just as many nerves in our feet than we do our hands. Wearing shoes all the time is like wearing gloves every day. And you can see this is my daughter's feet. One of them is really filthy, but for me, it's not saying that children need to go barefoot everywhere. It's saying that we need to recognise that there are so many benefits in children going bare feet. So many sensory benefits from a sensory integration perspective, from a balance, coordination, foot development. There are so many benefits for doing that. Having said that, there are environments where we wouldn't deem the benefits of going barefoot, we would deem them too risky. So for example, we know in summer in our backyard that there's a big gum tree that hangs over our fence. We know in summer that it masses in flowers, and all the flowers, they drop everything, and the bees get so heavy that they also drop to the ground. So we know that in summer, it's not a good time to go barefoot on our grass in the backyard, because we know that the bees will be there. So we've made that judgment. But it's such an important thing to consider the value of children being barefoot in some context. And probably to envelope all of that is this idea that childhood is an atmosphere. An atmosphere not only of the experiences that we provide them, but it's the values of our service, the values of our family. It's our pedagogy. It's how we view play, how we view children as competent and capable. If we view children as competent and capable, we will therefore provide them with the agency needed for them to take control of their play experience. And we will play a very important role in facilitating that. So there's lots of dimensions to what this idea of a habitat is, and we play such an important role in that. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on as well is, in addition to those 4 components, is the idea of a connection to nature. Now, obviously I have an ecology background, I have an environmental background, so I'm clearly passionate about nature. But if I was to say to you, where does this fit with your priority for you as an adult, and where does it fit for your children, this idea of a connection to nature? And for most people that go, honestly, it's not super high. And I think I can change that with this example, a couple of examples I'm going to give you. Because it's such an intangible concept, this idea of being connected to nature. And sometimes it can be romanticised and seem like we need to go and do some forest bathing to be connected to nature, when that's very, very far from what I'm intending to convey here. So I use this example everywhere I go. I say to everyone out there who's listening is that you've had a really long day, maybe like today. You've had a long day, and I'm going to give you 2 options of places to sit. In both of these places, your senses will receive the same type of stimuli. It'll be just as noisy, the smells will be just as much, and you will feel the same level of noise. However, the first spot is a metal bench in a city. So you've got this metal bench in the city, beautiful tall buildings, you hear the horns, you can smell the city smells, no one's going to bother you. The second option I'm going to give you at the end of your long day where to sit is a wooden bench under a big tree in a meadow. But there's lots of birds going on, same level of noise of the birds compared to the traffic. And it's the same level of smells, because you can smell all these flowers and all that sort of stuff. And in the city, you can smell all the city smells. No one will bother you in either one of these places. And I say to you, where would you rather sit? For most people, in fact, I haven't encountered someone who said the city yet, but most people say, actually, Joseph, I want to sit there. And I say, why is that? Why would you rather sit somewhere where really the only difference is the setting? Why would you rather sit there? And they say, well, I guess it's calm. And for me, I'm like, okay, what else? It's nice. But there's something in our hearts that draws us to that area. Something that calms us. When we hear the thing is, oh, I just want some fresh air. What we're saying is, I need some time to get out, regather my thoughts, take a deep breath. And a lot of the time, that's in a natural setting. Our children need that too. If all we had was a city, we wouldn't get the feelings and the benefits of that calmness in that field under that tree. If all our children have is a confined space to play, where are they going to get that fresh air? Where are they going to get that calmness? So this very much leads into well-being. Our well-being is dramatically increased when we have time spent in nature. So that's the first component of nature connection. And the other component, and the last component I want to talk about, it's not so much the well-being side of connecting to nature, and for children especially, because it's important for them to have access to nature, but it's a love for nature. It's developing a love, and I've seen it in my daughters. And I say that because if we look at the future, we can see that things like climate change, habitat destruction, we can see so many bad things. And I don't like to talk about it too much because, you know, it's quite grim. I like to talk about the positive stuff. But we can have 2 types, from my view, we can have 2 types of people heading into that future, because we know that that future will be challenging. We can have people who don't feel connected to nature, who start to develop some eco-anxiety about what might happen in this world of ours. Or we can have people who learn to love nature as children. They love nature, they nurture nature, they view nature as part of them, not different, not less, not more, as part of them. And if they develop that love, then when things happen, they can say, well, hang on a second, I'm going to stand up for that species, I'm going to put my hand up, and I'm going to utilise whatever I do in my profession to make a difference on things like climate change or sustainability or recycling. I'm going to do my bit because I love nature and I care about nature. And that is such an important thing, because it also establishes empathy, this idea of nurturing, and they're qualities that we want our children to have, especially moving into a very much online driven world. We want to have resilient, we want to have caring, empathetic children. And what we do today matters. So when I talk about this atmosphere of childhood, I also talk about the connection to nature from a well-being perspective and from a really caring perspective. And that caring perspective will instill our children with the notion that they can make a difference. And I think that is such an important thing to go, you know what? I can make a difference in this world. And I think that is such an important thing. So I might finish it there because I'm looking at the time. And I know I've got a little bit over time, but I can clearly talk for a very long time on this, and I would love to talk more, but I will finish it there. In fact, what I will finish it on, obviously I want to say that this is our website, and if you want more information, go to our social media. I'm often really bad at promoting our organisation, but here it is. Jump on that stuff and you see some great things. But what we'll finish on is my background as in ecology and conservation has led me to many times in my life thinking that I can't change the world anymore. This climate change stuff, this stuff is too much. And I remember working with some kids, and we were doing a butterfly garden at the time, and I was going back and forth to this butterfly garden with them. I was mentoring them through what plants to use. We were looking at different learning components, etc. In the back of my mind, I'm like, why are we doing this? Because I feel like I'm starting to lose this idea that I can change the world. I've always been, I want to change the world sort of person. And then a few times I went back, and the child said, Jace, come here. And I went over. I was like, yeah, what is it? He said, look, there's a butterfly on the plant that we planted. I was like, there is too. And that's when I had one of the most important realizations in my life, is that I can't change the world, but I can change it for someone or something. And that someone was that child, and that something was the butterfly. Now, the children in your care, you can influence their life. You can influence their life in one of the most powerful ways that any adult can. You are a mentor. You are, at times, their shining light. So I'll leave you with that. I really hope you got something out of this. Don't forget to check out our socials, etc. I really hope you get something out of this, and I'll make sure the information that I send to Karen to send out will have lots of great links about this information and lots of ways, if you are South Australian, that you can get involved with us, but also just some other bits and pieces. So thanks so much for having me, and I really hope you got something out of it.
We're just so grateful to have you, Jason. What a wonderful presentation, and just the photography and how you presented was just magnificent. I mean, if we weren't inspired to get out in nature before, boy, those photos just I just want to jump out the window and off I go. It was just wonderful. Thank you so much. There was one question, and I think in some ways you've almost answered it by what you were saying, that, you know, we are the ambassadors, we are the advocates. And there was a question, I'm just from Mary, who says, you know, how do we get governments and service providers to see the outside environment as important as the inside, if not more important? We agree with you there, Mary. And fund for better EC services with fantastic outdoor spaces. It's a big question. Jason, what's your take on that?
I think it's a great question. And I think where it all starts is if we look at what we can influence. So at times, sometimes we can't influence at the top, but what we can influence is the experiences that we give our children, but also how we document those experiences, how we document them, how we share them, and how we demonstrate how they are meeting things within the early years, within the NQS. We demonstrate and we build case studies, and we build case studies on that. And if you're trying to build a case for the director of your service, I think it's really important that you do look at that terminology and you do demonstrate the benefits, because, you know, it's a very clear link when you see the evidence. When you see the evidence, when you see the children's, whether it's their artwork, when you see the children's musings, when you see the recordings from the educators, you start to see the benefit. And I think building that case is really important if you are coming against some barriers, because I've seen sites who had 1 or 2 passionate teachers, educators, and they have started to document and record, and that has grown. They've shared it with their colleagues. They've shared it to the point where it began to change their culture as a site. If you change your culture as a site, what that means is changing your vision and your vision statement. And if you are a leader within the site, then whether it's your partnerships, whether it's the other connections you have with other sites, is maintaining that as part of your identity and having it as part of your statement. And that's often when I look at kindies, the first thing I do is I look at their vision statement and I look at what their values are. And starting with the values also implies to your parent community and gives them a voice. So I love what this site does. I love what they stand for. And that as a collective, that small community, can start to push that. And that's what you can influence. Because sometimes you can't influence the top. It can get frustrating. But at that ground level, the experiences you're giving your children are great. But unless you're documenting, other people can't see the greatness in that. I hope that provides some level of assurance that there are things that can be done. Obviously, keep doing whatever it is that you're doing, keep pushing, keep putting things, but often it does come down to how we frame those experiences. Because too often we say, oh, look, the kids are just playing with sticks. Whereas my thing is, you know what, those children are really engaged in critical thinking and resourcefulness. Look at their peer-to-peer relationships. Look how well they're using their vocabulary. And I've said the same thing. They're not playing with sticks, I've said all this other stuff. So I've reframed it, and that way it can slot into whatever curriculum frameworks you're measuring your success against.
Oh, that's wonderful. I would like to just, there's a beautiful comment here from Elizabeth, who's in Sydney, and she says, Jason, thank you. You have relighted my vision for nature play, and listening to you has lifted my soul. So I think that's a wonderful way to end this afternoon. And I think we all owe Jason a lot of thanks for his passion, his vision, and his encouragement for all of us who just want the best for our children's futures. Thank you, Jason. And just quickly before we go, I'd like to tell you our last session for term 1 in our early years series will be on Thursday, the 7th of April, again at 4 p.m. at Melbourne time. And this time we'll be speaking with Kim Knersh and Michelle Shaw from Wyndham City Council. And they are also an early years management provider. And they'll be talking about developing and delivering a kindergarten program based at Werribee Mansion. So I would imagine there's going to be a lot of outdoor and nature activity within that project as well. So we look forward to seeing you all then. And please go to our website, playaustralia.org.au. Go to training and PD, and you'll be able to book in for the 7th of April, our last session for the series, and we'll be back in term 2, much more. And thank you again, Jason. Thank you, Nature Place South Australia. And it's been a pleasure having you part of the presentation today. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.